Everyone smile. It's good to
Okay.
see Bentley. Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
seen you on a call in a long. I know you've been on calls I haven't been on, but it's good to see you again on the calls.
Oh, hi, Michael.
Yeah.
So I say let's do a short round of where everybody's at before we start picking topics. How's that?
Reasonable. Do you want to start or you want me to go or?
Go ahead. You had.
Okay. Yeah, my very brief news is first of all that my daughter's on winter break, so I actually have like 6 months of maybe some room to breathe. So I'll probably be participating more in whatever way I can. Um, but at the same time, I got really inspired. I think probably most of my participation, other than in the meetings, will be trying to write articles around fundamental concepts. Part what we talked about having on the website, and maybe just kind of working on sort of our value proposition in different ways. Ways of explaining to people what we're trying to do. I had a meeting. No, I didn't have a meeting. I had an internet exchange with somebody who has different political opinions than me, in a forum, and there was some doubt about, I mentioned what we're trying to build, and they're like, yeah, I don't think so. And I think, it's enough to want to find the truth, and you just need to research. You need to do your own research, that sort of thing, right? It's the do your own research approach.
That should be an official logical fallacy.
Yeah, really, exactly.
Should write that
But
much.
what that uh, sent me off on was, what? I think I would like to catalog in some way attack vectors on information, on knowledge, right? And I happen to have a friend who's a professor of, um, I don't even know what she studies these days. It's anthropology and a lot of other things, but she has studied a lot of uh, I don't know, psyops and information. What do you call it? Intelligence approaches and things like that. And she was especially keeping an eye on what was happening with Brazilian elections and the attacks on Brazilian politics. And I'm like, you know what? Like, do you have any academic resources on this sort of thing? She's like, oh, sure. She didn't understand what I meant by attack vectors, but then she threw me a whole bunch of stuff. I've only gone through one article so far, but it's all about what's called hybrid warfare, and attacking, having a war when the other side doesn't know there is a war going on, and the tactics used to essentially induce confusion. It's very fascinating, and that's like a whole series of attack vectors. And I want to kind of catalog in some way intentional attack vectors and unintentional ones. It's essentially disinformation and misinformation. So I'm going through that and studying that, and it's really important to see how the canonical debate idea, having a value proposition for each one, because out of one of these academic papers I just read, it talks about how you attack, and there are phases in which an organization gathers information, makes a decision, takes action, and right there, and this is in military documents and that sort of thing. Like, the goal is to send out a lot of conflicting information at a velocity that's too fast for the organization to absorb in its cycle of what they call OODA, right? Decision making, action, observation, all that. And that right there is a perfect value proposition for the canonical debate, because our idea is to much more quickly digest information, verify it, so that people can act on it, right? So that right there in the first paper I read, it's like, boom, there's military strategy and the way canonical debate can help. So that's sort of my current hobby, what I'm going to be spending the next weeks kind of reading and gathering and then trying to write something up. But also I'll probably try to pause and focus on what we can specifically put on our website, maybe some website redesign that we've talked about but not done for the last few months. So that's my update.
Thank you.
Who's next? On my screen, it would be Marc-Antoine, who's next to the right of me.
Okay, fair enough. I've been a bit in thinking paralysis, but on the other hand, still thinking about all the issues of scoring we were talking about. One of them is the issue of, I was just reading your notes. Yeah, there's not one way of scoring, and except, of course, who believes this, which is sheer numbers. But I don't think it's what I want to promote, because it's a way to promote disinformation, and it totally short circuits experts, like when experts are valuable. There are use cases where experts are more important than the crowd, and vice versa. And I don't want to short circuit that. So, okay, maybe multidimensional, maybe, tags for this community of experts believes this, and that's or has reasons to disbelieve this. And then we get into reputation, and then we get into and I'm beginning to even think that maybe reputation is a useful use case for tokens and blockchain. Certainly not currencies, but and certainly there has to be ways to retrospectively assign reputation for even non-participating experts based on correct predictions. So that's one axis of my thinking, but certainly the notion that I want to know, given a claim, what reasons would there be to believe otherwise, and whether those reasons themselves are believable. What believable reasons are there to believe otherwise? And I think there's definitely an entropy thing. It's definitely interesting here when people who would otherwise believe the claim statistically accept the reason. That's a data point. That's an information. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. Just as a counterpoint to what Tim said about attack vectors, which I think is fascinating, and I want to read that research, and please share. I'm very much researching, on the other hand, what's instead of the mistake compendium and the fallacy compendium, I want a constructive conversation move compendium for SenseCraft. Like, what is a positive, moving the conversation forward move? And that's something I'm thinking about on the side.
I know there are books on that subject. There's a lot of people talking about, how to have a constructive conversation. So
yeah, I've read some of them, and they're not exactly organized in compendiums the way the negative ones are. There's, do this one thing and do this one thing and be open. And yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm very much thinking about the conversation process. I was part of a little conversation game recently, which was so simple, so ridiculously simple, and so useful, I think. It was basically, card game, pick a card, you get a conversation, a topic, and then tell a story based on that topic. And you had various listeners who had, again, cards so that they would have a certain filter to listen to the story through. And that means you had multiple perspectives to reflect on your story. Simple, useful. It was very interesting for me to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know if responding to people takes us down threads that throw off this process. But I just want to say that is also interesting from a value proposition type thing, because one of the themes I'm trying to hit on when we talk about what we're doing is that free speech is supposed to allow like an idea marketplace, and there's no concrete effort put into ensuring the idea marketplace leads to positive outcomes, right? We just believe it'll happen naturally. And so if we could categorize what makes a discussion constructive, it dovetails with, what is a better outcome.
Yep, yep,
What
yep,
is a
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
That,
that's
that,
interesting.
by the way, in the Maps DAO closed channel, I know we're recording, but that's okay. I made a little document. Yes, sorry, Bentley. That's my closing remark. I made a document about what I see as a data architecture for projects, like more the projects data model, and where the collective intelligence fits in that data model. It's a document I wrote at Andy's behest. He criticized, I responded. There needs to be a next step for that. So I do invite you all to read and comment, because the link between ideas marketplace and taking action is something I tried to make more explicit there. And over. And on the next one would be Stephen and my screen.
I can be short because, as you noticed, I haven't been around much lately. I've been very busy. I'm wrapping up the academic project I've been working on for the past 5 years or so. So I'm now full-time in industry. So I'm just writing up a paper on software architecture, basically, which is now, the cool thing is we have the same architecture running, unrelated, but still cool, both in industry with a different infrastructure, different tooling, as well as in industry right now. So we're using a common core model, the whole domain-driven design thing I've been talking about before. And it's being used by 2 different stakeholders right now on top of an open source library. So it's pretty cool stuff, and that's what I'm finishing up now. In terms of CDL, my goal this year is still, if I find time, to focus more on the user interaction part, like the augmented news article, and actually pulling in people into doing this micro voting on top of news articles, like reading through an article and adding, oh yeah, I believe in this one, claim this, and then pulling them into an argument graph, which I already have in place. But yeah, that requires some polishing touches in order that people don't run off. And of course, writing some example articles. So that's what I will be doing. Next for me is Felix here.
Okay. So I'm fighting on many different fronts. But one is, for example, the generic modeling tool, which I call Boost 3 right now. I showed it to Marc-Antoine once, but it's lacking a lot of user interface. But the basic modeling capabilities are there to model arbitrary entity relationship models, and then get a UI and forms for it automatically. So I hope that becomes something we can use to try different argumentation models. One thing, I need to invest a bit more time in it, but it's very promising. Another thing is I'm thinking a lot about the website. I like to point people to stuff, to content. So yeah, Timothy, very happy to pair on website stuff with you. And I specifically thought about, hey, we have this huge list of projects that we often mention to people, but then we're not able to point to something specific. I mean, we can give them the list, but the list is just overwhelming. So I thought, how about, since we created these collective intelligence challenges, why don't we just create a huge matrix that has these challenges, and then on the other axis the projects, and then see which project tries to address which challenge, so we can easily navigate the list and have that on the website. I think that would be very useful, also for us and for outsiders. And the third thing I'm thinking about is to achieve scalable collective intelligence, is argument mapping a requirement or not? I'm just wondering that. I'm wondering, can we achieve this intelligence with or without argument mapping? And if we can achieve it without, which implications does that have for our work? And if we only can achieve it with, which implications does that have? So I think it's worth a discussion. Next for me is Bentley.
Hey, so I've been gone for a while too, mostly taking care of my mom and some of my own kind of health issues, which kept me distracted. But I'm back. At least I'm back working. We'll see how much time I spend in CDL. But I have hired one person and probably going to hire 2 more people to work very part-time on Golibot for like 10 hours a week, and having multiple people so I can get multiple perspectives rather than one person at 20 hours, 2 people at 10 hours. We're going to try and, I haven't scheduled it yet, but going to launch Golibot as a fact-checking website with a feedback loop, unlike a lot of the other websites that they just do their fact checking. They have a couple paragraphs. So I'm backing away from decision making because I found out it's still too complex for where Golibot is right now. So we're going to tackle this. And so we're going to take 5 claims and run them through Golibot. So we have kind of a handful, do a beta launch, see what people think, what feedback we get, how social media interaction works. And then that's kind of the experiment. It's more of an experiment than an actual like project, right? So this is just to see if this works and kind of prove or dismiss of the tool. Yeah, so while I'm doing that, that data would be interesting to map out in Felix's tool or any other things where we want to have some examples. And then if there are any ones that y'all think are important, you might check with me and I can have my internet researcher go and kind of gather claim stuff. And yeah, I really like the idea of doing that matrix of the systems. I tried to do that with features, but doing it by goals is much better. So that would be great to see. And I've also moved that into an Airtable, which for me is a little easier to kind of manipulate the data. So I don't know if that would be helpful or not, because other people probably prefer other tools. Yeah, so that's where I'm at. So I have 2 weekly meetings with my team, and we're recording those and putting them up on YouTube if anyone wants to keep an eye on what's going on in Golibot. And then we'll be releasing something, I don't know, months, but eventually. Once we kind of do a few of the claims, we'll get an idea on how long it'll take to get everything out. And then we're doing some user experience design tomorrow, have a 2-hour meeting with a designer to make it a little bit easier to understand the scoring and how to move around and read everything. So yeah, so that's what I'm up to, and then I'll hang out here whenever I have some time.
You're muted, Bentley.
We lost his video. I think now we lost his voice. I don't know.
No, I still have Bentley's video.
Yeah, something's going weird. My app is locking up. Well, go ahead. Can y'all hear me at all?
Yeah, then Michael.
We're hearing you now, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I could read his lips, so he was saying it's me anyway. I think I got a bunch of just half-baked thoughts of trying to sense make some stuff anyway, so I'll be brief. I've just been thinking about, I think Block Protocol released some graph specifications, and so I was trying to look into that to see if it would be useful or if we could use it at all. So that'd be kind of neat to look into, thinking about temporal debates versus canonical debates and the distinction between those and what that means. Thinking about how a UI could properly convey like a graph's semantic meaning when the outermost edges are undefined, and trying to figure out what that sentence even means. Thinking about how just human knowledge base in general and being able to query it. That's just me trying to catch up, I think. Thinking about contacting the creator of Kialu, I think, is that how you pronounce it? That I'm not sure. Someone mentioned that in the
We call it
Yeah.
Kialo.
Kialo? Okay.
Kialo. Yeah.
Someone mentioned that in the Slack Hangouts, and also system.com. I'm not sure if anyone's mentioned them or if has contacted them. That'd be neat to contact them and bring them into the conversation, as well as
System.com. What is this?
system.com.
System.com is actually a very interesting collective knowledge graph.
Mm.
Kialo we see as a competitor, to be absolutely honest. System.com could be interesting.
Cool, good to know.
Please elaborate what it means, competitor, Marc-Antoine, because I think we tried to reach out earlier.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
could. Well, let me summarize. I think Kialo had actually sent some people here, or they had come from Kialo independently towards the beginning, and they were kind of interested in what we were talking about. But the main thing is, I don't think we see them as a competitor so much as they see us as a competitor, because they're a for-profit business. They have the same kind of altruistic end goals as us, but they're a business, and therefore they have to kind of protect their IP and what they're doing, and that sort of thing makes them not interact with us well. They can't play well with us. But I think, their heart's in the right places. It's just that they're going a different route.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, we're open, so we don't really have competitors. But for me, Kialo is a good example of how to do this wrong, in the sense that it's totally focused on the pro-con and doesn't have opening questions or anything to get out of the very antagonistic mode. And I think that's a flaw.
And also, we kind of take them as maybe a starting point in terms of design, the model, and that sort of thing, because if we can't do better than Kialo, then we might as well not do anything or just help Kialo somehow. But we see that there are a lot of things the model misses, and so we look towards really, really, really long-term design, as opposed to just kind of building something and iterating on. I mean, we individually iterate, but our design sessions are looking at the big picture long-term, and making sure we capture everything.
Yeah, we think Kialo has chosen to go very simplistic, and maybe too simplistic, or at least some of us believe that. I'm much more aligned with Kumu, for example, personally, which I think is a much better big picture.
And the only last one I have was it was Joel Chan from Discourse Graph and Scaling Synthesis, and looking into how he's created the structure of Discourse Graph, and seeing, I want to contact him to see where he's written some papers or looked at. I want to see if he's got some academic resources into the structure of how he's created it. And then I'm trying to track and follow. He's got an extension in Roam Graph right now, but they're also building it into Logseek, which is an open source software. And I'm interested in following that and seeing how that pans out in terms of, because they've got some funding right now, and they have in terms of some of their missions to ultimately create a world knowledge graph. So I think there's some alignment there, which is interesting to follow and see what could show up there. So
it's amazing what Joel Chan is doing, and I think absolutely worth connecting with him. Logseek, just for the record, is partly open source. The backend isn't.
I didn't know that. Good to know.
One more comment regarding connecting with more people is like the MapsDAO Discord channel is like full of like 200 interested people in that space in general. So we probably might find some people who are actually interested in getting deeper into the CDL, because like I think many people said like, oh yeah, I did a PhD in that, I'm interested, but then I never participated in anything because like there was nothing to participate in than just coding, I think. But maybe we find some interesting people there.
Just for the record, because it's a good conversation. There's many good conversation starters today, but I'm really curious because for me it's obvious that argument mapping is part, or conversation mapping is part of the collective intelligence project, I could try to justify it, but I'm more curious about the counterpoint that Felix had. I mean, if you doubt it, why do you doubt it?
Because it kind of works in small groups without argument mappings, right? If I'm working in a group of 5 people and we're discussing something, we're not writing anything down, but we still make progress.
Okay, that's an interesting argument, though I would argue that it's actually been shown to work better with argument mapping.
It's true. Yeah, no doubt that it works better with argument mapping. I'm just wondering if we get anywhere at all without, right? If we just manage to scale the communication between the groups, we achieve something without argument mapping.
How do you scale communication with big groups? That's the whole challenge. I mean, that's for me the primary reason for working on argument maps. If there's no need to scale, then yeah, you don't need argument maps. You need a whiteboard, and you need to put 5 smart people in a room, and they'll indeed come to a conclusion that at least they can all agree on. If you want to scale that, and by scale, collective intelligence is all about scaling. It's large groups of people. It's not 5 people in a room. Then you need some asynchronous communication mechanism and some mechanism to catch up on previous conversation you missed out on. You need some central representation of accumulated knowledge. And that's arguably argument maps.
That's what I would say you actually don't need.
Okay.
Because humans in their head already have a state, which is very incomplete, and that's fine. But if we let the right people talk to other right people and coordinate this communication, we can like have a big picture distributed in many different heads of people.
I guess the question I would pose then is, what are you proposing that's different from what has been done throughout history? Because that's like the current state, as far as I understand, would be. So what are you planning to add?
We cannot scale with as is. Now, is argument mapping the right technology to scale is arguably an open question, but certainly we cannot scale without something.
Yeah. So what has been tried is like just basically getting more people into the room and not much else. Like, I mean, like the World Cafe method is something, a method that does it differently, which basically says, okay, let's get more rooms that stay small and have some people coexist in different rooms at the same time, kind of, right? And that means like we have communication bridges between many different small rooms. And that's something I think would enable scaling if we find a good network topology of coordinating communication. Well,
sociocracy has been one of the answers to that problem, right? It's and they've done it in a totally non-software means of just let's change the communication topology so that we can have better conversation and decision making. And arguably, it's a success story.
How's it called again?
Sociocracy.
Sociocracy.
Sociocracy's mechanism is basically you have a hierarchy of groups of 10 people, and they are arranged kind of hierarchically in that you go towards higher level decision at the top, but every group of 10 people has one person reporting up. And that means the upper group of 10 people is made from 10 groups of 10 people, like the representative of 10 groups of 10 people, and so on. And so everybody reports up, and there's always also somebody report. So there's always one person designated to be the uplink and somebody designated to be the downlink. And the other important point is they use consent as a decision mechanism, and works pretty well.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, it's these kinds of topology ideas. I think that can make it work without argument, because they don't involve argument mapping, I guess.
The reason I still believe in the worth of argument mapping, and it's interesting that Stephen brought up the scientific method, an absolutely great point, is See, my problem earlier when we were talking about not pure number aggregates is what happens when the truth is complicated and requires expertise and contrary to common sense, which happens all the time in science, right? And so we have peer review as a mechanism. And the question of how to propagate a non-obvious truth is also, I think, a problem. Yes, we're done with updates. This is why I started that particular rabbit hole. Then, or if that's okay with everybody. The question of how to propagate non-obvious truth for me is really important. But yeah, topology is part of the answer. There's no question there. I mean, we do have why can't we scale? Because not everybody has the time to hear out everybody. And we still want the better ideas to propagate somehow.
But I mean, I mentioned the scientific method because it's a great example of how we did scale, historically speaking. Yes. A lot of knowledge was accumulated, and indeed by not putting 2,000 scientists in one room, but by having research teams publish pieces of knowledge that then get peer reviewed, etc. That is a topology that has been working historically quite well. The problem is it doesn't scale beyond that. It doesn't scale to allowing lay people to investigate that knowledge anymore, or to get a quick overview of what science has done. That's the scaling problem right now, society-wide.
Right.
And
it's like
technology has scaled quicker and has ended up delivering misinformation and disinformation both to the people in an easier fashion than science has been doing. That's the scalability issue. Like, how can we have more people be involved in the sense-making process? In a way, be part of science, actually.
Actually, it's a bit of a parenthesis now, but you know, I had the discussion before about ways to bring the conversation forward, and the fallacy list is also important. I think in all cases, one reason to have collective intelligence, besides using everybody's intelligence, is teaching people better conversation skills, and teaching better people about fallacies and probabilities and good moving forward conversation moves. And for me, that's a prime objective of SenseCraft. It's as a pedagogical tool. And yeah.
Going back to the scientific method discussion, like, I don't see any flaws in the scientific method, right? I don't think there's holes. Well, I mean, there are limitations, but there aren't holes being poked in the method itself so much as the way it's executed right now, right? And I think one of the CDL goals is to make it more efficient, right? And that's not just more people participating and lay people participating, but also maybe making it more granular and easier to analyze each and every claim within a larger study and paper and so on, right? And also speed up the process of verifying. I mean, we have right now, I would say the scientific process is working, but I say this at a point where we have the, what do you call it, the replication crisis, right? Especially with social sciences, where people realize there's a major flaw in the methods that were being used, right? And so what have they done? They proposed a change where you pre-register your study, including what you are trying to get out of it, those sorts of things that you're looking at, because there was a piece they found missing. How long did it take them to find that? I don't know, 50 years of methods and approaches. How many of the, so all the past science that has been done all has a question mark next to it now because they didn't do this before. And I would say that it's constantly improving, but it took decades, right? So hopefully we find new techniques to speed that up.
Absolutely valid point. The meta reflection on the scientific method is useful, but I agree that the scientific method, it's not that it's perfect, but that it does allow for the improvement process being part of the method. And
back to the
that is-
scaling aspect, to be clear, I really think argument mapping helps for the whole system to work better. I just can imagine it to work at least in a somehow scaling state, not perfectly, of course, without argument mapping. And I'm wondering if this can be developed separately to create good argument mapping, because like we are having a very hard time to create something, right?
Well, we're having a hard time because nobody's full-time job is to do it necessarily. I think that's a big problem. Also, you know, at the edges of the thing we're trying to build are basic problems in philosophy that still haven't been solved, right? So, you know we're not going to be able to solve everything. We're trying to grapple with all those things, but at some point we have to kind of box it and say these problems we're not going to solve on this iteration. But so those are some of the reasons. But as to the point of whether or not it has to be argument mapping, I think probably not. But before we do any sort of exercise as to is there a better way to do this, first of all, we're all here because we saw it as an obvious solution, and there's got to be points given to that. It makes sense, so we should at least try it. But the things I'm working on right now with information attack vectors, which are really, what are the ways, cataloging the ways that misinformation or disinformation happen, is a fundamental piece of, if there's another way to do this, does it satisfy all these criteria? So, I think it would be helpful to consider other ideas, but also helpful to have kind of the groundwork to measure each idea.
Let me take a look at it the other way. I mean, I don't think that we I didn't come to argument mapping because I thought it would be a good tool to solve this problem. It's like I was trying to document what's happening in conversations and what's happening in the minds of the people in the conversations, and the data shape that came out of that is something we happen to call argument mapping. So whenever you're trying to scale or automate something, you look at how you do it manually, and you improve that process by automating the automatable bits and storing information that's too big or complex for the human mind. So, there could be another tactic to go to look at, rather than modeling what's in the conversation or in the people's mind, let's get people together. But so, yeah, argument modeling may not have to be all, but I think it would be one of the automation bits, regardless of whether there's other. I mean, you can do both, right? Those are two different solutions that don't conflict. So I think it will always be one of the tools, but can you find a solution that doesn't use it? Sure.
Yeah, I think it is true, like you're saying, sorry, just going back to Stephen's point that, hey, scientific method worked without argument mapping. But also I think that the fact of not having it is a bit of an obstacle, and they built parts of it because they needed it. Like I would say the Science Citation Index is a small part of. The question is, there's a sheer amount of information, and you want to have the backlinks, like has this particular statement been argued against, refuted, why, how, why not, why is that believable, yada yada. And the problem there is, and in science, pretty much everything's been refuted by one study or another, and because the studies are rarely absolutely conclusive, and so you're looking at weight of evidence, so you're looking at a ranking, and after that, whether the ranking gives rise to a visual map or not is, I agree, possibly accessory, though I think what is important is you have a statement, you want to know everything that's been, the weight of evidence on either side, and a way to rank what are the most significant reasons to believe or reasons to disbelieve that particular statement. And again, Science Citation Index is one of the tools in that direction, but obviously it doesn't do the whole job because it's possible to miss stuff. And the other difficulty is when the questions are quote unquote uncommensurable, because and here I think mapping is important. It's because there's such different worldviews that people working in different paradigms in the Kuhnian sense. And they're not aware of one another because there's just so much to know within your little bubble that you're not even aware that there's this other little bubble doing a totally different type of work on the same problem. And even being aware, putting things in a map gives you a chance to at least be aware that this exists and is worth addressing. And this is where what I see as, you know, my hobby horse, which is map wormholes between maps and or map alignment, is relevant. But it is clear that ordering of epistemic reasons to believe or disbelieve a given claim is actually the prime thing. And this ordering is non-trivial because it's recursive and you want it to be immune to bubbles and you want it to be immune to just numbers and to be, if we're going beyond the scientific discourse, you also want to be immune to bad faith arguments, and even within the scientific discourse sometimes, which is even more complicated. But this is part of what we're trying to solve. It's a fundamental problem of philosophy of science, as Tim was pointing out, or of philosophy in general, philosophy of epistemology in general. But yeah.
But I do think, I mean, yeah, it seems like most of us agree argument mapping will be part of it. But to take Felix's point in its most meaningful way, I would argue it can't be the only part of it. I think maybe that's the key takeaway message. And sometimes maybe as a group we focus too much on argument mapping and omit some of everything else around it, which is probably equally important.
No, that's a good point.
Does that mean that we want to expand the scope of our sheet that we were talking about of all the systems to also include all the processes? Like
it would definitely be relevant, I think, to be overly broad in, and we have been. It's not 180 argument mapping tools that I listed there, but I think it makes sense to be overly broad in what technology is relevant to then see indeed what are they doing, how they tackling it, to then maybe be lured into looking at even more other related systems. I think that makes sense to keep a very open mind.
I think the whole scaling aspect is we basically covered with cognitive capacity, I think, right? Because it has to scale with humans. Like machines don't have a problem to read all the information. It's just humans.
If you imply that the machines that read it understand it.
No, I'm just saying like they are able to like actually like read it, and humans are not even able to read it. So
yeah, okay.
Humans are the bigger limitation here.
Oh yeah, clearly.
Mark Antoine, the last couple of weeks there was a conversation about layers in the CDL that we were going to have. Does this relate to this as well?
Not directly, but yes, I guess so. I mean, we said one of the layers is just representing the knowledge elements, if you will, and the other layer is, of course, any kind of scoring. And you know, and in a way, when I say representing as the first layer, it's a data representation, and then there's a visual representation, which is a layer above that, above both. So yeah, there's and it's true that Stephen is often reminding us to not burden the data representation of the statements with the data representation of the scoring, if you will. And I'm very interested in the data representation of what I call the social truth And yes, I agree, it needs to be detached from the data representation of the statement itself, but it is a non-trivial data representation task, because in my mind, we want to have the reality that everything said about everything exists in multiple versions, and there's all these people saying these different things about that statement. And representing that multiplicity of values in a meaningful way is a non-trivial problem. Meaningful how, meaningful for who, meaningful up to a point for what use case and for what data representation. So I'm not sure there's a universal there, but on the other hand, I think that just being naive, I find many knowledge graphs just look at asserted statements, asserted triples or asserted something. It's like, no, each triple is both asserted and denied, or if it's a triple, it's subject, predicate, this object value, or that object value, or that object value. And we want to know all the object values asserted by everybody. And so it's not as simple as saying, has this been asserted? It's how is it being asserted and how justified and blah, 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 blah. So that's my take on the fact that maybe the data representation of the social truth value of a statement is a bit more complex than just asserted, non-asserted. And that means it may have impact even on how we represent at the data sharing layer, our global truth state, if you will. Though, of course, the representation of what is being asserted is a problem in and of itself, and a non-trivial one because of the inherent recursivity. So but yeah, I don't know if you have some, Stephen, you're the one bringing up layers. I'm paraphrasing you a lot, as well as myself. You may want to add things.
Well, not only me, I think you primarily also reiterated what Timothy believes, right? That scoring should be separate from a data model.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the more you try to decouple these things, that also means that the thing you decouple becomes less functional in a way. And that doesn't mean that is the right thing to do. I mean, if you look at the base, what I call the base layer that I have, it's so primitive and naive that, well, if you want to do anything more, that means you need to build a lot of additional data on top of that, which then begs the question, is this base layer still useful? I believe so, but it all comes down to like the abstraction you decouple in one layer from another. Can it act on its own, and is it useful on its own? If it's not, then it shouldn't be decoupled, right? So if scoring is so intrinsically linked to the data model you're using, if what you want to do with the scores should really directly manipulate the data model, they should be coupled. Then you have tight coupling, and decoupling that might cause you more headache than anything else. But my argument, of course, is that there shouldn't be a coupling there, because for me, scoring is simply an expression of belief, and that's a personal thing. And I also want to show individual scores to individual people, so I don't even want to store it centrally, etc. So it depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, let's face it. Let's be clear. For me, decoupling would also be a huge benefit, because we're going to be experimenting with different scoring vectors. So having a coupling is also detrimental there.
But of course, it only works if the scoring is not coupled to the data model. So
yeah, and that I'm not 100% on yet, because of, for me, it is more than having individual belief and individual.
Yeah, once you want to model logic and you want to have logic have an impact on scores, then there's more coupling than.
Yeah. And having a good, this whole notion of reflecting the fact that every statement is multi-valued is is affecting the base data model at a fundamental level. Anywho, so that's on scoring and levels and layers.
But I really like Timothy's suggestion just to focus on goals right now. and indeed see what are all these systems trying to do. And I think we've done a similar exercise before between just our projects,
Yes.
but opening that up to the full list and trying to somehow catalog these in a meaningful way, and then writing it up as a nice article. I think we discussed before is something we all want to do. So
I'm all for that. I think it's a very good use of our collective time.
And we'll probably discover new stuff that we haven't seen before.
Like system.com. Thanks for the reference. Whenever you have systems like this, just post them somewhere on Slack.
We have a channel.
Is that the related?
Yeah. We have the related project for that. Exactly. I think it's the right.
So do we want to have a working session on gathering that data and also figuring out what the, I forgot the word that you used, Felix, the concerns or the
challenges,
challenges.
but I think it's more about
is that our list of challenges from the
which challenge they're approaching, basically, something like this. Yeah.
And another question I posted in chat before, I didn't mention it live. If there's a goal to publish this, maybe there isn't, but then it's worthwhile thinking about the method before just going out and doing stuff, because from my experience, it should be, if there's some documentable method behind this and we follow that, which you can then call it systematic, it should easily be publishable. So not just as a blog post, but as an academic paper, fairly easy, because review articles are always in high demand.
Yeah.
What would be the advantage to publish it as a research paper?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm leaving academia for a reason. It's a pain. It is more work, definitely, because you need to go through a painstaking process, but you also remove bias by doing that. So the main advantage is having less bias in the categorization by the nature of coming up with the method a priori, be more inclusive and open to what you include.
I think our quote unquote ulterior motive is saying, the question at some point was, what is our value added? And it's explaining how we're tackling some goals that we feel are not being addressed in the domain, or at least not globally. And we might turn out wrong. Maybe they are being addressed. But, knowing that would be useful.
I think we have a bigger audience when we just publish it on the website instead of writing a paper.
Well, you can do both.
But as you said, it's a lot of work.
If you want to, if you want to publish, then you do need to think about the method beforehand. If not, we can do it more ad hoc and just come together and loosely come up with categories. And to be honest, a lot of scientific papers do exactly that. They just post-rationalize, oh, we did this process. They write up what they did. So, I mean, yeah, I'm just suggesting it. It's an option. By no way, I think that's the only way that we should do it. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, I kind of stopped writing papers because I realized that no papers ever, or nothing I ever did was like done and correct in a sense, because like whenever I published something, you get a lot of feedback, for example, from Hacker News, and then you realize, oh, damn, I didn't think of this. And yeah, but if you publish a paper, then it's there. And then you publishing another paper to like correct that is like so much more extra work than just correcting a blog article.
Certainly, I must admit, there's this move, by the way, speaking of scientific method, from papers to microclaims. You've probably seen that. And maybe we should publish a bunch of microclaims instead, because it's kind of what this is not fooding for us, right?
Yeah.
It is
what we're trying to.
Or come up with a loosely defined method without any intent of getting published, so you don't need to read shitty reviews and then try to resubmit. We just write that up as a blog post. I mean, already right now, apparently people are mentioning the Excel sheet in academic presentations. So I'm certain if we do the next step of that and come up with our categorization, people will be interested.
Yes.
I was typing it out here while you're talking about it. I've never heard of this as another academic option. Send it to the group so I can look at it, because it is absolutely, one of the things I've been trying to explain to people is, could you imagine science being done rather than in big papers, big blocks, smaller claims that each one can be validated separately. That's, why an argument map, breaking a paper down into an argument map could be interesting and help accelerate the scientific process. If people are already doing that, I would love to read that and see what they're saying.
It's more that they're posting microclaims as extracts out of their papers, backed up by the published papers, as far as I know, in order to.
But we were talking about breaking papers down into argument maps, and that's a very, you can't say that a paper is a single argument map, right? So it's not going to work the same way, but it's interesting then this approach.
I'm trying to find the microclaim. Something it doesn't Google well. I've seen it, trying to remember where.
But like, are these published as papers themselves, just much shorter papers then?
No, well, there are, I remember there was something about microclaim repositories.
Isn't it related to polyplexes? Was that the name?
By the way, I'd love to have Mathilde back into this conversation. We should. I understand there was some thing where she felt it wasn't. There was a disconnect recently. I'm trying to understand what happened. I should just call her, I guess.
Probably with map, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, we're at the hour.
Yes. I'll try to find microclaim references. Polyplexes does not ring a bell, so I think there was something else.
This is where I think I heard it last.
No, it does ring a bell, so it could be that. But I'll look into it more because I've seen that before. I'll try to find it.
Great, good session.
Yes, it was good to reconnect and just have this. Where are we all at?
I will watch the previous recording soon. And maybe I will leave some lengthy comments and Slack as usual.
Perfect.
Yes. Ciao, ciao.
Okay, see you all. Bye.
See ya.